Good morning, everyone. Happy World Oceans Day. My name is Emily Pomeroy, and I'm the Program Manager at Save Our Shores. Thank you so much for joining us for Save Our Shores Ocean Week, and thanks so much for kicking it off with our Tidepool book reading and virtual Tidepool exploration activity this morning. We will begin today's activity by reading the book in One Tidepool. Make sure to stay tuned after the book for a virtual Tidepool exploration video. We hope you enjoy! In One Tidepool, Crabs, Snails, and Salty Tales by Anthony D. Fredricks, illustrated by Jennifer DeRubio. Dear two-armed explorer, welcome to my wet and splashy home. Now, I don't want to brag, but I'm actually the star of this neighborhood. In fact, you could say that I'm a rock star. Get it? I'm an important member of this crashy, splashy place. A tide pool is an exciting place to live. It's always salty, always wet, and often churning back and forth. And some of my friends are really incredible creatures. Wherever you look, you'll discover a rainbow of critters: red, green, blue, orange, brown, and white, in widely different sizes and shapes. We're an unusual bunch, especially the snails with their funny hats. But no matter what we look like, we have learned to live together. Why, some of my neighbors even make breakfast and dinner for me. Or should I say, they are breakfast and dinner. This tide pool with its salty water and slippery rocks is our habitat, where we find food and have our babies. You live in a habitat too. Like me, you may be the star of your home, but remember, we're different too. You have muscles, and I eat mussels. Your five-armed buddy, Sea Star. Here is a coastline with pounding waves, sea-splashed rocks, and hidden caves, with seagulls gliding out of reach, and clumps of kelp tossed on the beach. This is where a tide pool lay, crowded with critters on a summer's day. This is the tide pool. A curly-haired girl with wondering eyes found crabs and fish and a five-armed surprise. She carefully watched the things she found, dozens of animals all around. A questioning child, she truly cared for the tide pool home these creatures shared. Barnacles with legs so small that waved at the girl who watched them all. In one tide pool, fun to explore, a web of life on a rugged shore. These are the fish that dart and hide, and find their food in the surging tide, near barnacles with legs so small that waved at the girl who watched them all. In one tide pool, fun to explore, a web of life on a rugged shore. Anemones with stinging cells hold fast to rocks and empty shells, friends to fish that dart and hide, and find their food in the surging tide, near barnacles with legs so small that waved at the girl who watched them all. In one tide pool, fun to explore, a web of life on a rugged shore. A blood-red sponge clings to the ledge, a curious creature from edge to edge. Close to anemones with stinging cells, the ones who grip the rocks and shells, neighbors to fish that dart and hide, and find their food in the surging tide, near barnacles with legs so small that waved at the girl who watched them all. In one tide pool, fun to explore, a web of life on a rugged shore. A group of snails with spiral hats glide across the bumps and flats, beside the sponge upon the ledge, a curious creature from edge to edge. Close to anemones with stinging cells, the ones who grip the rocks and shells, neighbors to fish that dart and hide, and find their food in the surging tide, near barnacles with legs so small that waved at the girl who watched them all. In one tide pool, fun to explore, a web of life on a rugged shore. Thieving crabs drag borrowed rooms, shuffling across the seaweed blooms, past the snails with spiral hats, who glide across the bumps and flats, beside the sponge upon the ledge, a curious creature from edge to edge. Close to anemones with stinging cells, the ones who grip the rocks and shells, neighbors to fish that dart and hide, and find their food in the surging tide, near barnacles with legs so small that waved at the girl who watched them all. In one tide pool, fun to explore, a web of life on a rugged shore. A cluster of limpets, brown and white, cling to a ridge with all their might, and watch the crabs with borrowed rooms shuffle across the seaweed blooms, past the snails with spiral hats that glide across the bumps and flats, beside the sponge upon the ledge, a curious creature from edge to edge. Close to anemones with stinging cells, the ones who grip the rocks and shells, neighbors to fish that dart and hide, and find their food in the surging tide, near barnacles with legs so small that waved at the girl who watched them all. In one tide pool, fun to explore, a web of life on a rugged shore. A knobby sea star slowly slips across the pool on feeding trips. It creeps by limpets, brown and white, who tightly cling with all their might, and watch the crabs with borrowed rooms shuffle across seaweed blooms, past the snails with spiral hats that glide across the bumps and flats, beside the sponge upon the ledge, a curious creature from edge to edge, close to anemones with stinging cells, the ones who grip the rocks and shells, neighbors to fish that dart and hide, and find their food in the surging tide, near barnacles with legs so small that waved at the girl who watched them all. In one tide pool, fun to explore, a web of life on a rugged shore. The tide pool hugs a rocky place, a magical realm with a craggy face. It harbors all creatures, protecting each one in their own splashy world beneath the bright sun. The end. Wow, so incredible to hear about all the amazing animals that live in the tide pools. Next, we'll get to see some real-life examples through our virtual tide pool exploration video. Good morning, everyone. My name is Emily Pomeroy, and I am the Program Manager at Save Our Shores. Thank you so much for joining me today for our virtual tide pool activity, and welcome to the tide pools. Today we will be exploring the rocky intertidal zone, or the rocky shore. What is an intertidal zone? The intertidal zone is where the ocean meets the land. This can sometimes be along the sandy shore, the rocky shore, and other types of coastline. Today we'll be looking at the rocky shore and exploring all of the tide pools where amazing and unique animals live. The tide pools are always changing as the water along our coast rises and falls. Sometimes the rocks along the coast can be mostly covered up by water, while other times they can be exposed to the air. What do you think causes our tides to change? The moon. The gravity of the moon pulls the water on the Earth's surface. As the moon orbits around the Earth, this causes us to experience 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day. Today we will look at the 4 zones of the intertidal. They are the spray zone, the high intertidal zone, the middle intertidal zone, and the low intertidal zone. Let's take a closer look. The spray zone is only sometimes covered by water. The spray zone gets splashed by the salty waves coming in from the rising or falling tide. Most of the time, this zone is exposed to open air. Not too many animals live in the spray zone. It's more likely that we will find algae or lichen here, although sometimes you can find birds looking for insects and other things to eat. As we move closer to the water, we begin to enter the high intertidal zone. What types of animals do you think we might find here? In this zone, we can find the strongest animal in the entire ocean. What do you think that is? Mussels, of course. We might be able to spot other animals among these mussels. Do you see anything here? In the high intertidal zone, we can also find other animals, such as barnacles, like these gooseneck barnacles, limpets, and snails. Watch closely and see if you can spot any of these snails moving around. Snails move around using a muscular foot underneath their shell. It's okay to pick up some animals in the tide pools to take a closer look. But always remember the one tug rule. If you try to gently pick up an animal and it doesn't come off the rocks, then it's best to leave it alone. The closer we get to the water's edge, the more we're likely to find. Let's keep exploring and head to the middle intertidal zone. What types of animals do you think we'll find here? I wonder what we can find in just one pool. First, I see mussels and snails. I also see a new type of animal, an anemone. While looking around, it's okay to touch some of the animals too. Always remember to be very gentle. All those spiky arms you can see are tentacles. Anemones have lots of tentacles that catch food floating in the water or even small crabs. They use the tentacles to move the food to their mouth, which looks like a big hole in the middle of their body. Anemones like to live very close to their neighbors. How many anemones can you find in this pool? I don't think I can even count. How many do you see here? I count 21. How many did you find? Not all anemones are the same. They can come in lots of different colors and sizes. What colors do you see? Sometimes you might not even recognize them. Anemones close themselves up when the water gets low to protect themselves from drying out. They can also stick shells to the outside of their body to camouflage and protect themselves against birds and other predators that want to eat them. The outside of their body feels soft, squishy, and even a little slimy. So far, we've taken a pretty close look at some snails, mussels, barnacles, limpets, and anemones. I wonder what else might be lurking around these tide pools. Can you see anything? Oh look, another crab is scuttling about. Whoa, it looks like something scared him off. I wonder what it was. Oh look, I spotted another crab. He is blending right into the background. I wonder if that's what scared the other one off. Shore crabs like these are very common along the central coast of California. Let's watch this crab and learn more about it. What is it doing? It looks like this crab is enjoying a tasty snack. These types of crabs sometimes feed on green algae, like this one here. They can also sometimes eat snail eggs, small crustaceans, and even more. It seems like crabs aren't very picky eaters. We've seen a lot of animals in the middle Intertidal Zone. Do you see anything else here? Wow, a sea star. This little sea star is tucked away in a tiny crevice. Sea stars often hide in small places like these to get away from anything that might want to eat them. There are so many different types of sea stars. They come in all different colors, different shapes, and different sizes. Sea stars cling onto the rocks using their tube feet. These little suction cup-like feet are all over the bottom of their body. They can use their tube feet both to help them stick on as well as to help them move around. I wonder what this sea star is doing. I notice that the middle of its body is sticking up. This could mean that it's enjoying a tasty snack. Sea stars are predators, which means they eat other animals. They can eat mussels, barnacles, crabs, fish, and even more. Their stomachs are on the bottom of their bodies, in the middle of their arms. When sea stars eat, they actually take their stomach outside of their body to eat their prey. Whoa! This sea star is eating another sea star. Well, I guess it's a fish-eat-fish world. There is always so much to see and do at the tide pools. I wonder what other creatures we can find. Chitins are another type of animal you can find at the tide pools. These ancient creatures are oval-shaped and kind of flat, with 8 hard plates along their back to protect them. The largest chitin in the world is called a gumboot chitin, seen here. These chitins are very large and bright red colored. Their squishy underside is called a muscular foot that they use to move around, just like snails. The middle intertidal zone was full of life. If you're brave enough, you can get close to the low intertidal zone, the closest zone to the water. But be careful. Always remember to keep one eye on the ocean and watch for waves. Otherwise, you might get a salty, splashy surprise. The low intertidal zone is always wet. This zone is almost always completely underwater, except for during the lowest of tides. You will find a lot of plant life here, such as sea grasses, kelp, and brown algae like this. In the cool waters of these pools, you might be lucky enough to find a sea slug, like this sea goddess, or a bright pink Hopkins rose. If you look very closely, you might be able to even spot some fish, like this sculpin. Whoa, it looks like it's eating something. I wonder what that is. We have seen and learned about so many different animals and plants that live in the tide pools. All of these animals are very different from one another, but they do have some things in common. Do you notice any patterns about these animals? Or anything that might be similar about them? I noticed that many of the animals that live here are camouflaged. This shore crab blends in so well to the kelp and rocks around it. This red abalone also has a great ability to blend into its surroundings. You can barely see its red shell, especially with all of the barnacles stuck onto it. Sea stars can be found in many different colors, and they can even move their bodies to fit into small cracks in the rocks, which helps them to go unnoticed. This sculpin also blends in so well to the background. The stripes and spots on its body help it to blend in with the coral, rocks, and kelp. Let's not forget the master of camouflage, an octopus. If you're lucky, you might spot an octopus in the tide pools, but you have to look very, very closely. Octopuses can change their color and even their texture in an instant. You have to look close or you might miss it. Camouflaging is very important for animals in the tide pools. When the tides are low and the rocks are exposed to the air, it's easier for predators to spot a tasty snack. Birds like these oyster catchers might eat animals that live in the tide pools, such as mussels. But if the animals can blend into the background and go unseen, they have a better chance of surviving. Did you notice any other similarities or patterns among the animals we've learned about today? Another pattern that I noticed is that all of these animals that live in the tide pools have some way of sticking onto the rocks. This is a very important thing to do so that these animals can survive the pounding waves that hit them over and over again throughout the day and night. Remember that sea stars use their tube feet to stick onto the rocks, but their tube feet can also help them to walk and move around. Unlike sea stars, other animals stick to the rocks and stay there for life. Anemones are one animal that does this. Other animals also stick to the rocks for their entire life. Mussels and barnacles both do this too. Even plants that live in the tide pools need to have a way of hanging on. This sea palm has what's called a holdfast. A holdfast is similar to the roots of plants. A holdfast does not absorb water or nutrients like plant roots do, but the holdfast does help the sea palm to cling onto the rocks and survive the crashing waves. There is always so much to see and do at the tide pools. They are a very fun place to visit and observe. There is so much to learn, and oftentimes you might even find an animal that you've never even seen or heard of before. When you visit the rocky shore and take a look at the tide pools, be sure to follow some of the tips provided in this video. Always remember the one tug rule. If you try to gently remove an animal from the rocks and it doesn't come off right away, make sure to leave it alone. If you do pick up an animal, be sure to put it back exactly where you found it. Always be gentle if you decide you do want to touch some of the animals here. When walking on the rocks, go low and slow. Keep your body low to the ground and travel slowly to avoid slipping and falling. Always keep one eye on the ocean to avoid getting splashed. Additionally, be sure to follow your local jurisdiction's guidelines for safety and social distancing during the time of COVID-19. Be sure to visit beaches and tide pools when your local jurisdiction says it is allowed. Last but not least, always remember to have fun. We hope that you enjoyed this video and have fun. Be sure to check out our website for more virtual distance learning opportunities. Thanks so much for joining us, and we can't wait to see you next time.